Hey there, and welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's, well, let's be honest, maybe a little uncomfortable. But it's also just so fundamentally human. We're talking about lying. Not just, the massive scandals, but the everyday stuff, the half-truth, the things we don't say. For this deep dive, we've really been digging into excerpts from a pretty fascinating source. The Anatomy of Deception, Why People Lie, the Language of Deception. Our mission, really, is to unpack what this material tells us. About the psychology behind it, the different kinds of lies, and this is a bit I find really interesting. The language, those subtle signals in how we talk when we're maybe not being entirely straight. How do you get well-informed about something so tricky, so universal? Well, we're going to explore that together. And before we jump right in, just think for a sec. Have you ever told a white lie? Maybe, said you were 5 minutes away when you were still looking for your keys, or maybe said, I'm fine, when you were really definitely not fine. Look, everyone navigates this territory.
We're going to dive into the why and the how, based on what our source says. And, understanding these kinds of layers in communication, that's actually pretty key for getting fluent in English. The whole nuance around truth and, deception is baked right into the language. So if you're working on your English, honestly, you'll probably find some useful stuff here. All right, ready to dive into the messy, fascinating truth about deception? Let's do it.
It really is fascinating, isn't it? It's a core part of just being human. Even though we talk a lot about honesty in our culture, deception is kind of woven into how we interact. And this material we're looking at, it asks that big question right up front. Why? Why do people lie? And it doesn't just settle for the easy answer that, some people are just bad.
Right. It suggests it's way more complicated than that. So if it's not always about, malice or bad intentions, what are the deeper psychological drives the source points to?
Well, the source lays out several key motivations. There's the obvious one, right? Avoiding punishment or, negative consequences.
Yeah, getting caught doing something you shouldn't.
Exactly. But it also talks about gaining an advantage that could be personal, could be professional. And there's a really significant one, protecting yourself or protecting others. And that immediately makes the morality of it feel trickier, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, the why behind the lie suddenly seems really important.
Precisely. Intent matters. Other reasons listed are things like maintaining your social image or your reputation.
Yeah.
Avoiding embarrassment is another big one.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Nobody likes feeling embarrassed.
And then there's manipulating or controlling situations or even other people.
Control.
Yeah.
That feels like a pretty powerful driver for some people. And what about just wanting things to go smoothly? Like avoiding a fight.
Yep, that's in there too. The source calls it keeping the peace or avoiding conflict. And it really stresses that when you look at all these reasons together, you see that lying isn't always, inherently evil or malicious. Sometimes it's a strategy, maybe not a great one, but a strategy for dealing with complex social stuff. Or, like you said, protecting delicate situations. It kind of pushes us, the reader or the listener here, to think about times we've maybe bent the truth a bit and really consider the why. Why did I do that?
That really reframes it, doesn't it? Takes it away from just pure moral judgment and more towards understanding, like human behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And the source doesn't just stop at why we lie. It also gets into the different types of lies, suggesting they're not all the same thing.
That's right. Breaking them down helps us see the different shapes deception can actually take. The material identifies 5 main types. First up, there are white lies, the classic ones.
Yeah, the little ones. Supposedly harmless, meant to spare someone's feelings, like telling your friend their slightly disastrous haircut looks great.
Exactly that. Simple, usually low stakes, very socially driven. Okay, then there's omission. This one's more about strategically leaving key information out. So you might say something that's technically true,
but it's misleading because of what you don't say.
Precisely. You withhold the context that would change the meaning. The source uses the example like, I was just at a friend's house. But you conveniently forget to mention which friend, or maybe that you were supposed to be, at work or something.
Gotcha. Truth by technicality, but yeah, still deceptive in effect.
Exactly. Next up, exaggeration. This is making something seem bigger or better or maybe worse than it really was.
I waited for hours when it was 20 minutes.
That's the perfect example, yeah. Claiming you waited for hours versus 20 minutes.
I think probably most of us are guilty of a bit of exaggeration now and then.
It's definitely pretty common. Then you have denial. This is more direct, just refusing to admit the truth, even when maybe the evidence is right there.
Just the flat, nope, didn't do it.
Right. In the face of clear facts, I didn't do it. Okay, and finally, fabrication. This is making something up entirely. Just creating a story or a fact out of thin air. The example in the source is someone saying, oh, my grandma's in the hospital when, she's perfectly fine, maybe playing bridge somewhere. Pure invention.
Okay, wow. So we've got this range of reasons why people do it, and then this spectrum of how lies actually look, from little white lies to total fabrications. Now, this is the part I find really, really fascinating. The source digs deep into how lying actually impacts the language we use. Does telling a lie literally change the words and phrases we choose?
Yeah, this section is incredibly insightful. The material highlights that while there are definitely common linguistic clues or indicators, they're not like foolproof signals of deception. You can't just say, aha, gotcha.
Right. It's not a lie detector test built into grammar.
Exactly. And sometimes someone who is trying to lie might actually overthink it. They try too hard to sound believable and end up sounding, well, less natural than someone just telling the truth without thinking about it.
Trying too hard to seem credible, and it backfires.
Precisely. So the source lists some specific phrases that seem to pop up quite often in potentially deceptive language. They're almost like verbal crutches people lean on sometimes, phrases like, to be honest.
Which is funny, right? Because if you are being honest, you usually don't need to announce it first. It kind of raises a little flag immediately.
Exactly. It's ironic. Or, I swear I'm telling the truth. Same kind of thing. Others it lists are, why would I lie about that? Which is quite defensive. Believe me. The classic, long story short, which, as the source points out, often means you're about to get a very edited, potentially misleading version.
Yeah, the version that makes them look good.
Could be. Also things like, that's exactly what happened. A bit too emphatic, maybe. It's not what it looks like. That's a huge defensive one you wouldn't understand. That's often used to just shut down further questions. And I didn't mean to, which often comes up when someone's trying to minimize harm or intent.
It really does sound like a kind of verbal performance they're putting on, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Trying to manage the impression.
There's definitely an element of performance management there. But okay, beyond just specific phrases, the source really gets into broader patterns in the way language is structured. These can be even more subtle indicators.
Okay, patterns. Let's unpack those. What kind of patterns does the source identify?
Well, one really significant pattern is an increase in using the passive voice.
Like mistakes were made.
Exactly. That's the classic political example. It's a way to distance yourself from the action. Instead of the direct, I made a mistake or I lost the report, it becomes the report was lost. It sort of happened. But the person responsible is conveniently left out of the sentence.
Yeah, you see that everywhere when people are trying to dodge responsibility. It's amazing how common it is once you start noticing.
It really is. Very common when accountability is being shuffled around. Okay, another pattern, distancing language. The source observes that someone being deceptive might use more formal or less personal language when they talk about people or objects involved in the lie. So instead of saying my friend Sarah, they might say that person. Or instead of the money I owe you, it becomes the funds. They're linguistically creating distance between themselves and whatever the tricky subject is.
Making it less personal, less connected to them. Subtle.
Yeah, it is subtle. Then there's one that's maybe less intuitive, providing too much detail. The source notes that usually honest accounts are simpler, more fluid. You say what happened. But someone who's maybe fabricating a story might load it up with tons of unnecessary specifics, exact times, precise locations, descriptions of trivial things like, I was at the 7-Eleven on 4th Street at precisely 3:05 p.m. getting a blue raspberry Slurpee, and I saw a man walk by wearing a green hat.
Whereas an honest person might just say, yeah, I popped into the 7-Eleven this afternoon.
Exactly. The over-the-top detail can actually be a sign that the story is being actively constructed in their head rather than just recalled from memory. They think it makes it sound more real, but it can have the opposite effect.
Interesting. Okay, what else?
Hesitations and fillers are also mentioned, so more frequent use of, or starting sentences with phrases like, I guess, or maybe. These can indicate someone is struggling a bit to formulate their response, maybe searching for the right words to fit a false story, or avoid tripping themselves up.
It's like their brain is working overtime, trying to keep the invented story straight.
It can be a sign of that cognitive load, yeah. And one final pattern the source mentions is changing pronouns. So shifting from I, taking personal responsibility, to we, or sometimes even you. It can be a way to kind of diffuse responsibility, spread it around, or make it seem like a shared issue when maybe it was primarily one person's action, like saying, well, we didn't manage to finish the project on time, when really it was, I didn't finish my part.
Wow. Okay, that's a really powerful set of signals to be aware of. It genuinely changes how you might listen to people.
Nah.
But the source is careful to say these aren't definitive proof, right? They're just signals, things to pay attention to within the bigger picture.
Absolutely. That's the crucial caveat. They are linguistic cues that can correlate with deception, but they have to be considered in context. With everything else going on, it's definitely not about jumping down someone's throat and saying, aha, passive voice, you're lying. It's about understanding the potential complexities in how they're choosing to communicate.
Right. And the source also briefly mentions body language cues, I think. Though it sounds like it comes with a pretty strong warning label.
It does. It touches on the classic things people think of. Avoiding eye contact, fidgeting, touching your face, maybe weird or inconsistent hand gestures. But the really crucial warning is that these are also extremely common signs of just being nervous or shy, or maybe someone's just thinking really hard. So relying only on body language to detect lies is, well, highly unreliable according to the source.
Yeah, you'd end up misinterpreting a lot of perfectly honest people who just happen to be uncomfortable in that moment.
Precisely. The advice is more about looking for clusters of signals, maybe some of those language patterns we talked about, combined with other things rather than seizing on one single cue. And then the source adds another layer of complexity by bringing in culture.
Ah, okay. How does culture play into all this? How does it influence deception or truth-telling?
Well, the source points out that while, many English-speaking cultures say they value direct honesty, there's also this really strong emphasis on politeness, on not causing offense. And this creates the space where things like white lies become not just common, but often socially acceptable, expected even. It gives that classic example. Someone asks you, so do you like my cooking? And the polite, maybe slightly evasive response is something like, oh, it's very unique, or wow, this is really interesting.
The polite dodge. We've all been there.
Right. We learned that script. But the source contrasts this with other cultures where maybe directness, even if it feels blunt to us, is valued much more highly than a kind deception. And then there are other cultures where maintaining group harmony through indirectness, or even what we might see as kind lies, is absolutely paramount. So understanding these different cultural values is really important because what actually counts as an acceptable way to communicate truth or skirt around it isn't the same everywhere.
That's a fantastic point. It means even the definition of what constitutes a problematic lie can shift depending on the cultural context. Okay, so bringing some of this together, the source provides a little practice scenario, doesn't it? The example with Anna and Mark.
Yeah, it's a very relatable workplace situation. It's between two coworkers, Anna and Mark, and she's asking him why he missed a meeting. The source analyzes Mark's response.
So, based on everything we've discussed, how does the source break down Mark's language in that example? What signals does it point out?
It notes several things that align with the patterns we discussed. First, his initial hesitation, he starts with, yeah. Then his reason is pretty vague. I had a thing come up, car trouble. Not much detail unless pressed. He uses some of those common phrases we listed, like, to be honest, it's a long story.
Yeah.
And when Anna probes a little, he gets defensive, right? He says, why would I lie about that?
Yeah, you can almost hear those little potential warning bells going off based on what the source described earlier. The hesitation, the vagueness, the defensiveness.
Exactly. And the source is careful here, too. It states clearly, this isn't proof Mark did lie about the car trouble. We don't know for sure. But his response does incorporate several of those patterns and phrases that are frequently associated with potential deception, or at least evasion, that the material discusses. It serves as a really practical little demonstration of how these cues can actually appear in a normal conversation.
It definitely gives you a kind of framework for listening differently, doesn't it? Noticing those little choices people make. And the source even included a short vocabulary section, right? With some useful English expressions related to lying and honesty.
Yes, it did. It points out that adding idiomatic phrases like bend the truth or caught red-handed, face the music, come clean, and spill the beans can make your own English sound more natural when you're talking about these kinds of situations.
Spill the beans. That's a great one for revealing a secret, maybe one someone was trying to hide. Okay, now for the twist. The source leaves us with this really provocative idea near the end. It suggests that lying, in a weird way, actually relies on some pretty high-level language skills.
It does. It points out this fascinating irony. The skills you need to construct a really convincing lie often overlap quite significantly with the skills of an excellent persuasive communicator in general.
Huh. Okay, what specific skills does it link to effective lying?
Well, it mentions using complex sentence structures to build a plausible narrative, Having an imaginative vocabulary helps too, to make the story sound rich and real. You need significant emotional control, you have to maintain your composure, seem natural even under pressure. There's a sense of timing and rhythm involved in delivering it effectively, and, maybe surprisingly, empathy. You actually need good empathy to lie well.
Empathy. How does that work?
Well, you need to understand the listener's perspective. What do they already know? What do they expect to hear? How are they likely to react emotionally? You need to gauge all that to craft a lie that they'll actually believe, one that fits their worldview.
Wow. So the very tools that help us connect with people honestly, build trust, share truth, empathy, good vocabulary, storytelling, those same tools can be flipped and used to deceive. That's quite a thought to sit with.
It really elevates lying from just a simple wrong action, doesn't it? It makes it this complex linguistic and psychological act.
Which brings us back to you listening right now. This source kind of leaves you with a challenge, doesn't it? It suggests start listening more actively. Listen to conversations around you. Listen to people in the media, politicians, even advertisements. And try to spot some of these potential signals, those phrases we talked about, those language patterns. Not, to become some kind of amateur detective accusing everyone.
No, definitely not for that.
Right. But more to just better understand the dynamics of language itself, how it's used, how flexible it is.
And it also challenges you to think about how simple direct language can sometimes cut through all that complexity. It gives that great example of changing a complicated, evasive statement like, well, I didn't technically forget, I just got really busy with other things, to the much simpler and probably more honest, I forgot.
I forgot.
Yeah.
Plain and simple, much more direct. Well, this deep dive into the anatomy of deception based on our source material has been incredibly revealing, I have to say. Understanding the motivations, the different types, and especially these language signals linked to lying, it really gives us a sharper lens to view communication through, and honestly, maybe a deeper understanding of human nature itself. It's complex, it's definitely messy, but it's undeniably human.
And just paying attention to these subtle linguistic choices, these patterns and phrases, it truly enhances your overall grasp of language, your comprehension skills in English, regardless of whether deception is even in the picture. It makes you a more attuned listener.
Absolutely. Language is just such a powerful tool, isn't it? Whether it's used for truth or for something, well, less straightforward. We really hope this exploration has given you a lot to think about. Maybe consider that final thought we touched on. How much of what we say, even when we don't mean to be malicious, might involve subtly bending the truth or leaving things out? And what does that reveal about our own deep-seated desires to, protect ourselves or manage how other people see us? Keep listening. Keep learning.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today.
Yes, and thank you so much for sticking with us all the way to the end of this deep dive. We really appreciate you being here and thinking through these complex ideas with us. If you found this exploration of language and human behavior valuable, please do make sure you're subscribed to English Easy. Here for more content like this. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your host. Today, we're jumping into something I suspect hits close to home for, pretty much everyone listening. Yeah, let's talk about procrastination. You know the scene, right? You've got that thing you need to do. It's important. Deadlines may be getting a bit too close for comfort. You have the time. Right now, even. But instead, suddenly, cleaning the fridge seems absolutely critical. Or maybe you discover a deep, urgent need to research the migratory patterns of Arctic terns. Or, just scrolling and scrolling. We've all been there. That's procrastination. So today we're doing a deep dive. We're going to look at what it actually is, according to our source material. Why, psychologically speaking, we fall into it. We'll also grab some really useful English phrases for talking about this stuff. Motivation, delay, getting things done. And crucially, we'll look at some practical tips the source suggests for breaking the cycle. I'm personally very invested in this one. Let's just say research.
And it's great that the source material really elevates it beyond just, calling it a bad habit or laziness.
Right.
It digs into the emotional core of it.
Yeah.
Which I think is where the real understanding starts. It gives us a much better framework.
Totally agree. So let's start with the basics. How does the source define procrastination? Seems straightforward at first glance.
It is, initially. The definition given is pretty clear.
Yeah.
It's the act of delaying or postponing something important. And usually you do that by doing something easier or less urgent instead.
Makes sense.
And it gives those classic examples like, I should have studied, but I procrastinated by watching Netflix. Or just, procrastination is killing my productivity. Straightforward descriptions.
But then, almost immediately, the source adds this really critical point. I think this might be the most important takeaway, honestly.
It draws a very clear line and says it's not just laziness.
Bingo. Because that's the trap, isn't it? We just beat ourselves up. Ugh, I'm so lazy.
Exactly. And that self-blame, it's usually missing the point entirely. The source highlights that procrastination is often tied to much deeper things psychologically. Things like fear of failure, or perfectionism, or just feeling completely overwhelmed by whatever the task is. It's often more about managing difficult emotions than it is about effort or character.
Okay, that changes the game. It's not a flaw in me. It's how my brain is trying to cope with certain feelings around a task. So let's get into that why, the psychology. The source talks about a sort of battle in our heads.
Yeah, it paints this picture of a conflict between two key parts of the brain.
Yeah.
It's got the limbic system, that's the older part, handles emotions, wants immediate gratification.
But a feel-good-now part.
Exactly. Then you have the prefrontal cortex. That's the more evolved bit, responsible for planning, rational decisions, thinking about future consequences.
So my emotional brain wants the cookie now, and my rational brain is saying, hey, maybe finish that report. Future, you will be happier.
That's a perfect way to put it. And when a task feels difficult or boring, or maybe a bit scary, that limbic system, the cookie now system, often shouts louder. So you choose the short-term relief of not doing the scary thing, you scroll, you clean, whatever, instead of the long-term benefit of actually getting it done.
The source had that great internal dialogue example, brain. You should write that paper, other brain. Or we could reorganize the kitchen drawers. That feels painfully accurate.
It really does. It's the immediate, easy win versus the delayed, harder reward. And the source lists the common psychological triggers that give the limbic system the upper hand here.
Okay, let's run through those. Fear of failure was the first one. That feels huge.
It really is. It's that underlying thought, what if I try my best and it's just not good enough? So to protect yourself from that possibility, you just don't try. No attempt, no failure.
Yeah, that's a tough cycle. And then related but different, perfectionism.
Right. Here the thought process is more like, if I can't make this absolutely perfect, there's no point starting. The standard you've set is impossibly high.
So the gap between nothing and perfect seems so vast, you just stay at nothing.
Exactly. It leads to paralysis. Why start if you know it won't meet that flawless ideal in your head?
Oh, okay. What else?
Then there's simple task aversion. Some things are just boring, or difficult, or unpleasant. Our brains are kind of wired to avoid unpleasantness.
Makes sense. Avoid the pain.
And a really big one in our world today, instant gratification.
Oh, yeah. The phone.
Totally. Scrolling social media, watching videos.
Yeah.
It gives you these tiny, immediate dopamine hits. It's just so much easier, so much more instantly rewarding than grappling with a complex problem or a demanding task.
Our devices are basically instant gratification machines, perfectly designed to hijack that limbic system.
They really are. It's an uneven fight sometimes. And finally, the source mentions lack of structure.
Meaning, like, the task is too big or vague.
Yeah, if you don't know where to start or what the steps are, it's really easy to just say, I'll figure it out later. And the source adds that little parenthetical comment.
Oh, that you won't. Brutal.
Brutal, but often true, right? Without a clear plan or a first step, later becomes never.
So understanding these drivers, the fear, the perfectionism, the boredom, the lure of easy rewards, the vagueness, that's the key. It shifts it away from I'm lazy to, okay, which of these things is tripping me up right now?
Precisely. It reframes it as a psychological pattern you can understand and hopefully start to address. Recognizing your personal why is step one.
All right, so we've got the what and why. Now, the source gives us some great language tools, vocabulary, and idioms that native English speakers use all the time when talking about work, motivation, delay, all this stuff.
Yeah, it's a really practical list. These are phrases you'll definitely hear and can use to sound more natural.
Let's look at some. First up, to buckle down.
Right. This means to get serious, focus, and really start working hard, especially if you've been avoiding it. Like, okay, deadline's Friday, I really need to buckle down.
Got it. How about to get the ball rolling?
That's all about starting, taking the first step, initiating action. You might say it to encourage yourself or someone else. Let's just get the ball rolling on this project.
Okay. To bite the bullet. Sounds unpleasant.
It often is. It means facing something difficult or unpleasant that you've been avoiding and just doing it, getting it over with. I hate making these calls, but I just have to bite the bullet.
Been there. To power through.
This is about pushing hard to finish something, especially when you're tired or finding it tough. It's just 2 more chapters. Got to power through.
And the flip side of buckling down, to slack off.
Yeah, that's avoiding work or responsibility, not putting in the effort you should. He keeps slacking off instead of finishing his reports.
Which is, often what procrastination looks like from the outside.
Exactly. Then there's the straightforward verb phrase, to put something off. Simple meaning.
Mm-hmm.
To delay doing something. I keep putting off my taxes. Very common.
And the ideal state, to get in the zone.
Ah, yes. That feeling of deep focus, total immersion, where work feels effortless and time flies. The productivity sweet spot.
We all want more of that. But sometimes, even if you start well, you can lose momentum.
Right. You were making good progress, things were moving, but then you slow down or stop, the energy dissipates.
And finally, mental block.
That feeling of being stuck. You can't think clearly, can't figure out the next step, maybe feel overwhelmed. It's like a barrier in your mind preventing you from starting or continuing.
That's a super useful set of vocabulary. The source also threw in some idioms, which add a bit more color.
Idioms are great. They don't mean what the individual words say, like time flies.
Yes. The procrastinator's lament means time passes surprisingly quickly.
Or better late than never. Kind of an excuse, really. Acknowledges you're late. But hey, at least you did it eventually. Better than not doing it at all.
Drag your feet.
This implies deliberately delaying because you're reluctant. You don't want to do it, so you go slowly. Stop dragging your feet and just sign the form. On the back burner. This means something is set aside for now, given lower priority. Not forgotten, just postponed. We'll put that idea on the back burner until next quarter.
Under the gun.
Feeling pressured? Usually because of a tight deadline. Stressed, rushed, we're really under the gun to finish this by Friday. Kick the can down the road. This is about repeatedly postponing a decision or avoiding dealing with a problem. Just pushing it further into the future. Often used in politics, but applies personally too.
And that classic finish line moment, in the nick of time.
Meaning you finished or arrived at the very last possible moment. Just barely made it. And the source included that little dialogue snippet, Samantha and Jake. It shows how these phrases just naturally weave into everyday conversations about work and deadlines.
Yeah, seeing it used makes it click. Okay, so we know what it is, why we do it, how to talk about it. Now for the million-dollar question. How do we actually beat this thing? The source offered practical strategies.
It did. And what's great is how these tips directly address those psychological triggers we talked about. They're concrete actions you can take.
Okay, first one. Break tasks into chunks.
This is the antidote to feeling overwhelmed. Instead of facing Mount Doom, you just focus on the first few steps out the door. The source suggested the phrase, I'm going to take it step by step.
Makes that huge, scary thing feel manageable, less intimidating.
Exactly. Just focus on the very next step. Another big one. Set a timer, like the Pomodoro technique.
Right. Work in focused bursts. The phrase was, I'll work in 25-minute bursts.
This is clever because it kind of tricks your brain. Committing to just 25 minutes feels achievable, much less daunting than I have to work on this for hours. And you get that little reward, the break, coming up soon. It fights task aversion and leverages that desire for quicker rewards.
Smart. And then the obvious but essential one. Eliminate distractions.
Yeah, especially if that instant gratification lip is your main issue. The source phrase, I need to put my phone away and focus.
Yeah.
You have to actively create an environment where you can focus. Close tabs, silence notifications, whatever it takes.
Crucial. And to keep yourself going, reward yourself after.
This builds a positive feedback loop. Finish a chunk, do something nice for yourself. After I finish this section, I'll grab a coffee. It connects the effort with a pleasant outcome.
Makes sense. And maybe the simplest yet hardest. Just start.
Right. Using that phrase again, let me get the ball rolling. This tackles that initial inertia, that mental block. Often, the absolute hardest part is just starting. Even if it's tiny. Write one sentence. Open the file. Do something.
It's actually kind of amazing how those simple actions directly counteract the psychology. Breaking tasks hits overwhelm, timers deal with aversion and gratification, removing distractions blocks the easy outs, rewards build good associations, and just starting fights that initial paralysis.
They really are smart counters. They shift your focus away from the big, scary outcome or the bad feelings and onto small, manageable actions in the present.
The source also touched on cultural context briefly, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it pointed out how in some cultures, particularly maybe the U.S., there's this huge emphasis on productivity, on hustle, on being self-disciplined, the no excuses kind of mindset.
Right, always need to be busy achieving.
And while that can be motivating, it can also ramp up the guilt and shame if you are struggling with procrastination. especially if it's driven by fear or perfectionism. It adds another layer of pressure.
That makes total sense. If the culture screams produce, but your brain is screaming danger, avoid, that's a tough spot.
Definitely. But the source also noted that you hear counter phrases too, like cut yourself some slack or don't be too hard on yourself, which suggests there's also an understanding that, relentless pressure isn't sustainable. There's a need for balance, for self-compassion.
So it's not just our internal wiring, it's also the external messages we're getting. Important context.
Absolutely. It all plays a part.
Okay, so bringing this all together, the source kind of nudges you, the listener, towards some self-reflection.
Yeah, it poses those direct questions.
Yeah.
Like, what's something you have been putting off? Really think about it. What's actually stopping you? Is it fear, boredom, feeling overwhelmed? And how does it feel to procrastinate on it? What would happen, good or bad, if you actually finished it today? And then, the most practical one. What's the absolute smallest first step you could take right now?
Asking those questions really brings it home, makes it personal. It forces you to apply these ideas to your own situation instead of just thinking about procrastination abstractly.
That self-awareness really is key. Understanding your specific pattern is the only way to start changing it.
So what's the final big message from all this, the core takeaway?
I think the most powerful idea, the one that challenges how most people think about it, is this. You don't need to wait to feel motivated before you take action.
Wait, say that again?
You don't have to feel motivated to start. The source argues that action creates motivation.
Whoa, okay, so don't sit around waiting for inspiration to strike.
Exactly. Just start doing the thing, even if you don't feel like it. The very act of starting, of making even tiny progress, is often what generates the feeling of motivation to continue. Momentum builds motivation.
That completely flips the script. Start doing, then feel motivated, not the other way around.
Precisely. And linked to that is the final mantra, especially for the perfectionists out there. Just start, even if it's messy, even if it's late, even imperfectly. Because, as the source reminds us, done is better than perfect. That's so important. Chasing perfection often means you finish nothing. Getting something done, even if flawed, is actual progress. You can always improve it later, maybe, but you can't improve something that doesn't exist.
Wow, okay, that's a really powerful place to end. This deep dive has been fascinating. It really shows procrastination isn't some simple character flaw, but this complex mix of psychology, emotion, and habit. And understanding that, plus having the language and the strategies, it feels like there's a way through.
Absolutely. It's a near universal struggle. Yeah. But hopefully, exploring it like this offers some useful insights and tools for everyone listening.
Totally. And maybe a final thought for you to chew on, based on everything we've covered. Which one of those psychological drivers we discussed, fear of failure, perfectionism, task aversion, instant gratification, lack of structure, which one really resonated with you? Which one felt like the primary engine behind your procrastination? Really identifying that specific why for yourself might just be the most powerful first step you can take towards finding the strategy that works best for you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We really got into the weeds of procrastination.
It was a great discussion.
Hopefully you found it valuable too. Until next time, remember, sometimes you just gotta get the ball rolling.